Hi, everyone.
Hello again. We're on page 303, In Search of Christian Freedom by Ray Franz. The two subheads in this section, preferential readings and why do people accept this?
Preferential rulings.
Yeah, preferential rulings, that's what I didn't say, right?
You said readings, yeah.
Preferential rulings and why do people accept this? Ray begins, while on the governing body, I could not help but feel that there is a measure of discriminatory application of policy, one favoring those in a professional position. Teachers may teach evolution as a subject, doing so from a purely objective viewpoint, and preferably initially explaining to the class their differing viewpoint. As has been seen, attorneys are allowed to serve at political election centers. Perhaps most notable of all, however, is that doctors may not only belong to medical organizations which approve of such practices as blood transfusions and abortion, but they are also told that they themselves may administer a blood transfusion to a patient who is not a witness and who requests this. This is rationalized on the basis of the Mosaic laws allowing Israelites to sell to foreigners meat from animals that had died unbled. Yet the blood in those animals was still in their bodies, where it had been all along. It had not been extracted and stored, a process which the organization condemns as showing contempt for God's law. All the intense urging to show deep respect for the sacredness of blood, all the warning of blood guiltiness attaching to any misuse of blood, all the argumentation condemning any sort of blood as showing any storing of blood as showing contempt for God's laws, suddenly loses its force where such witness surgeons are involved.
In all sincerity, and with no desire to demean anyone, when reviewing all the various organizational ordinances, rulings, policies, and technicalities that have been considered, I cannot but believe that if an individual were to use in the more ordinary affairs of daily life the kind of reasoning reflected in those positions and rulings, people would feel compelled to question that person's sanity. Why do people accept this? In the Apostle Paul's day, he spoke of those who, quote, who want to be under law. Many today still do. Unlike the Judaizers, yes, of Paul's day, men may not advocate submission to Mosaic law, but by legalistic approach to Christianity, they convert it into a law code, a body of rules. They create a form of bondage to regulations, traditional policies, and these govern people's relationship to God.
But why do others submit to such imposition? What is it that causes people to relinquish the precious freedom to exercise their own moral judgment, even in the most private areas of their lives? What causes them to submit to the interpretations and rulings of imperfect men, even at the risk of losing employment, suffering imprisonment, placing marriage relationships under great strain, even risking life itself, whether it be their own or that of a loved one? Many factors enter in. There may be social and family pressures, with conformity as the way to avoid disagreement, even conflict. There can be the sheer paralyzing fear of divine rejection and eventual destruction if one should wind up outside the organizational arc. But there is another reason that is perhaps more basic, one that is often more at the very root of the matter.
Most people like things spelled out in black and white, like to have issues neatly cataloged for them as either right or wrong. Making decisions based on one's own conscience can be difficult, at times agonizing. Many prefer not to make that effort, prefer simply to let someone else tell them, be their conscience for them. This is what allowed for the development of rabbinical control and a body of rabbinical tradition in Jesus' day. Rather than decide something on the basis of God's word and personal conscience, It was a case of ask the rabbi. Among Jehovah's Witnesses, this has unquestionably become ask the organization, or simply ask Brooklyn.
Another reason is the subtlety with which such legal reasonings and interpretations are advanced and imposed. Religious emphasis on law, legalism, has consistently been marked by a use of technicalities and sophistry, reasoning that is not only subtle but also plausible, sometimes even ingenious, and yet false. To unravel such reasoning and see it for what it really is takes effort, an effort that many do not care to make, and that others simply seem unable to accomplish.
Consider just two examples from ancient rabbinical sources. In early times, teachers of the law endeavored to make the injunction at Exodus 16:29. And this is the quote, "Let nobody out from his locality on the seventh day." More explicit, they ruled that on the Sabbath, a man could walk only a certain distance, somewhat less than 3,000 feet, from the outer boundary of his city or town. This was called a Sabbath day's journey, an expression in use in Jesus' time. See Acts 1:12. Yet there was a way for a man to make a longer trip than this, and from the rabbinical standpoint still be legal. How? He could in effect create a second domicile at some home or place away from his locality, but still within the 3,000-foot limit, simply by depositing at that place on the day before the Sabbath provisions sufficient for at least 2 meals. Then on the Sabbath he could journey to the second domicile, and then leave it and extend his trip an additional 3,000 feet.
Gives another example, the statement at Jeremiah 17 verse 22, which forbids bringing any load out of your homes on the Sabbath day, was similarly amplified. The teachers of the law reasoned that there was no prohibition against carrying things from one part of a house to another part, even if the house were occupied by more than one family. So they ruled that people living in houses within a certain sector, such as those living in houses built around a common courtyard, could construct a legal doorway for the whole section by erecting door jambs at the street entrance to the section, with perhaps a beam overhead as a lintel. Now the whole section was viewed as if it were one domicile, and things might be carried around from home to home within the area without violating the law. This is incredible hair splitting, very reminiscent of rabbinic
silliness.
Rabbinic
who you
restrictions within the New Testament.
Yeah, who you fooling?
And there is a footnote about some of the hair splitting that goes on when it comes to the blood issue.
For the Watchtower.
For the Watchtower, footnote on page 303.
It says, "It should be noted that the same Watchtower of November 15, 1964, also leaves as a matter of conscience a grocer's or a butcher's selling of blood sausage to a worldly person." Prior to that, he was talking about doctors, right?
Mm.
It would seem that, having decided to use this portion of the Mosaic law to justify the lenient stand toward medical practitioners, the writer of the material felt also required to add this comment on grocers and butchers. However, once again, this is not selling meat from an unbled animal, but selling of a product made through the collecting and storing and processing of blood, elsewhere condemned by the Watchtower policy.
So when it comes to preferential rulings, obviously butchers and surgeons who make a living from profiting off other people's violation of the blood
would be
prohibition.
permissible.
Yeah, hair splitting like the rabbinic rules of the first century between the two testaments. And in the next segment, you have more on this torturing of technicalities by the Watchtower that is too reminiscent of Judaism in the days of Jesus and the apostles. See you next time.